I move on. Second speaker is Dr. Paolo Frankl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, if I may, I would like to share my screen as well. Yes,
Okay.
I hope.
Just a moment.
Yes.
Sure. He is the head of Renewable Energy Division, International Energy Agency, IEA. Dr. Paolo Franco joined IEA as head of Renewable Energy Unit 2007. The Renewable Energy Unit has become Renewable Energy Division, reflecting ongoing increasing activity of the IEA in this field. In this role, Dr. Franco served as the secretary to IEA Working Party on renewable energy technology and supervisor coordinator of division's activity. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you please confirm that you are seeing my screen correctly?
No, we don't see it yet.
Okay. So let's try again. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Very good. Excellent. So perfect. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting the IEA and myself to give a few concluding remarks on this important symposium on Edmond Becquerel. And in my short speech, I would like to show how the messages of Becquerel are so relevant still today, and that this is tied with solar photovoltaics in many effects, not just the effect itself, but in many respects. And actually, I would like to go through 4 main points. One is, of course, the scientist and the photovoltaic effect itself and where PV is. The second is, and it has been mentioned several times, the ties of Edmond Becquerel with the national industry. The third is the impact as a photographer, and the fourth is his attention to the new world. But let me start with PV, and it has been mentioned by some speakers before. The IEA and Dr. Birol, our executive director, has been vocal about the fact that solar PV is becoming the new king of electricity. And this is the slide that basically goes with this declaration. In these first graphs, you see the evolution of the last 2 decades in the power sector, which, as you all know, have been predominantly driven by fossil fuels, and in particular coal, but also gas. But in the future, in the next 20 years, this is going to radically change. This is the scenario with the already announced and stated policies, where already solar PV has the biggest growth. But this is much more importantly, the sustainable development scenarios, which is in line with the Paris Agreement, where the solar really becomes the new king of electricity, with at least 8,000 of additional terawatt hours of generation in the next 20 years, while the generation from coal and partly from gas collapse. It has been mentioned by several that solar PV is now the cheapest source in electricity in most countries when there are good resources and low cost of financing. And the deployment is set to triple before 2030 under even current policies, with the potential to grow much, much faster. Now, precisely this has important impacts, which were mentioned also by other speakers before, and which make the ties with Edmond Becquerel as president de la Société d'encouragement de l'industrie nationale. Now, so far as you know very well, manufacturing has been predominantly in the hand of Chinese companies. But in the future, in particular, if we look at scenarios that are towards not only sustainability, but to net zero emission scenarios for 2050, you see the following. PV will achieve the symbolic target of 1 terawatt sometime in 2022. Earlier or later in 2022, it depends on the impacts of the crisis and the next months. But then it has to triple or even quadruple in the rest of the decade, which is a massive increase of additional capacities. Now, this has profound impacts that were mentioned by some speakers before. If the market was increasing marginally, there would not be really a big business case for reintroducing industrialization in Europe. But with such massive augmentation of the world market and also a massive augmentation of increase of the European market, the question, why should Europe not take a significant part of this pie, is absolutely legitimate and takes a completely different perspective in respect to the past. I would add another dimension here, which is not only establishing supply chains and manufacturing in Europe, but also pay attention to the supply chains of critical materials in terms of an important variable for energy security in the next years to come. My third point is on the Edmond Becquerel, the photographer, the inventor of photography, and who had obviously is a big link with aesthetics. Now, as you can see in the picture on the left, there are millions and millions of solar rooftop PV plants in the world. But I think it is fair to say that compared to the fantastic picture and slide that Christophe Balif has shown before, there is a long way to go to make beautiful PV a mainstream application. Let's put it in polite terms. Now, it is, however, a real fact that building PV in building can bring a massive value added, not just as a generator of energy, but with other services for the building industry, from aesthetics, from building energy performance, multifunctionality of the building envelope. I think all these things are known, but certainly not mainstream. And in terms of aesthetics, since I had not the fantastic slide of Christophe, I took an old one from a European project where I was involved personally. It's more than 20 years ago exactly, where these panels were put at the entrance of the Castello San Giorgio in La Spezia in Italy. And at a distance of 2 meters, either you knew that these were photovoltaic panels, or you would never guess. The idea of screen printing and having images on PV panels was already there at that time. And you have seen from Christophe how many other beautiful things can be done today. My last point is the attention of Edmond Becquerel on the new world. And someone has said, and I tend to agree, that the feed-in tariffs, in the German feed-in tariffs, the French money, the Italian money, the Spanish money, was actually one of the most efficient tools of development aid ever, because they basically allowed cheap solar energy for the entire world, which is simple a fact now, at one condition, that you have a reasonable cost of financing. Now, this is true in the short term, where definitely solar is among the cheapest options for having off-grid solutions, for having energy access in the developing world. This is also true for the long term, for the production of hydrogen from solar and wind. And you will certainly see where the dark blue regions are in the world. This is really the developing economies. And in particular, it is a huge potential for Africa. So opening new opportunities of economic development and of energy trade. So let me conclude with a few points summarizing the relevance of Becquerel message even today. It has been said solar PV is becoming the new king of electricity at one condition, that affordable financing is available. And so I would like to emphasize that even on an LCOE basis, PV is among the cheapest. The role of governments is more important than ever to do three things: to really create the conditions to attract this affordable financing, to address system integration, and to look at the transitions in the hard to abate sectors like buildings, industry, and transport through electrification or through power to X. Now, in the net zero emission trajectory, the PV, which is already dominating the capacity markets in the world, would significantly accelerate. We speak about a factor 3, 4, or maybe 5 of annual additions. This calls for a complete rethinking of the European industrial strategies, manufacturing priorities, and supplying and managing of the supply chains. We have not touched it in now this afternoon, maybe in this morning. We are in a crisis context, and all the crises bring an opportunity. The European New Green Deal and the post-COVID recovery plan represent a huge opportunity to create jobs, to boost solar deployment, including the construction sector. And I would add one dimension which was touched now. It is very important that these plans support and foster innovation. There is a risk during the crisis that R&D money is cut. It has to be the opposite. We have to invest in our future right now. And for Europe, this is a priority. And my last point is the inclusive transition. For obvious reasons, Europe has all interest. Think about 1 second about migrations in allowing and fostering economic development through cheap solar PV in neighboring country, most notably Africa. This is, I'm sure, the interest and the message of Becquerel in the terms of the new world, and this should be a top priority for Europe today. With that, I definitely thank you for your attention. And again, once again, thank you very much for inviting the IA and myself to conclude, to give some concluding remarks today. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much. Thank you, Paolo, Frankl. Thank you very much.